I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll discuss those Super Gators from this past weekend's NFL championship game. Florida starts phase 2 of the Billy Napier journey called Identity, headed toward that 2022 spring practice, getting there sooner than later. We'll talk about the failed coup on the plains at Auburn and really kind of compare and contrast some of what's going on in Gainesville. Luckily, it's a very different situation out there. Caught our attention this week, though. And we'll finish with Will's article this past week on the hope and the promise of Anthony Richardson. Of course, a lot of hope and promise there for 2022. A lot of those hopes are pinned on Anthony Richardson, so it'll be interesting to hear what Will has to say about AR-15. Will, how's it going, man?
And a little bit tired, to be honest with you. I was telling you before we came on here that, every year I think, should take the Monday off after the Super Bowl. Every year I don't do it. And every year I regret not doing it. And by the time Wednesday or Thursday comes around, it's a little bit dragging, but we'll get through it, man. We'll get through it. A lot to talk about. Certainly always something going on with the Gators program. So it's fun to discuss it.
Yeah, it needs to be a mandatory off day across the Super Bowl Monday. It needs to be a holiday across the nation. I don't think many people would complain about it.
And my nephew's school has it right. They give him Mondays off. He was texting me while I was at work. I'm like, why aren't you in school? He's like, yeah, we don't go to school the day after the Super Bowl. And I'm like, man, I need to go teach there. Like, get me to Bishop Row, man.
Yeah, that's a great policy. We need to get that in. I always regret not taking that Monday off. It just, you don't think about it year in and year out. And it's a good thing to do. Definitely should implement that policy there. Let's jump into 2 bits here and talk about the Super Bowl. Will, few Gators in on the action. Florida's Van Jefferson, Brandon Powell for the LA Rams, of course, part of that Super Bowl champion roster. Jefferson, 4 catches for 23 yards. Powell, 4 punt returns for 25 yards. Not trying to overstate the importance of their contributions on Sunday night. Just pointing out there, but I did want to point out the biggest combined highlight between the two was that Matthew Stafford overthrew Jefferson in the back of the end zone for what would have been a great play. Jefferson was running along the back line there, had a great shot at the ball. If Stafford had a lower throw, had to get it up there, a little bit of coverage and a little bit of an overthrow, but Jefferson could have had that winning touchdown catch there. But I actually thought the better highlight with Jefferson was after the game. NFL Films, they caught him getting the news of that his wife had gone into labor. So he stuck around, got the hat, grabbed his 2 other kids that were at the game there with him, and headed straight to the hospital and had a newborn baby that night. Will.
Yeah, man. Congrats to Van Jefferson, obviously. And, hey, he was repping the logo. He had the gloves on with the Gator logo on it at the game. And, the funny thing is when Odell Beckham went down with the knee injury, you knew that the Rams were going to have to rely on Cooper Kupp. But Van Jefferson is one of those guys who's able to, at least in some capacity, keep the defense honest. And so you look at Stafford going to Kupp there in the last drive, and a lot of that is dictated by, the defense still at least having to respect Van Jefferson. Guys like Ben Skowronek, really not people that they were paying all that much attention to. 2 catches for 13 yards. They were putting guys out there at tight end, playing slot wide receiver because they didn't really have people to do that. And then on the last drive when the Rams won, they go spread. And there was a really interesting article on the Ringer today or yesterday that was talking about the splits and how the offense really spread out that last drive. And that's one of the reasons why the Rams were successful. So Jefferson was a big part of that. And then obviously the more important part, having the kid after the game. But, look, he's got a ring, right? Nobody can take that away from him. Nobody can take that away from Brandon Powell. And for all of the special teams issues that Florida has had over the last few years, I mean, what would we give to have a guy like Brandon Powell returning kicks in Gainesville again? I mean, he obviously was a leader on those teams with Jim McElwain. And, you basically knew his senior year that if it was 3rd or 4th down, the ball was going to Powell. That was a bad thing for those offenses because the defense knew where the ball was going to. But Powell's always been a really good player. So it's good to see him latch on with somebody and good to see those guys get a ring.
Well, Super Bowl and a kid, good luck topping that day, Van Jefferson. That's going to be a tough one to top the rest of your life. I think that's probably an all-time high right there. That's a great night for him. On the Cincinnati side of the equation, Evan McPherson, talk about that special teams, some of those one of the great kickers in Florida history. Key piece of the Super Bowl run for the Bengals, Will, 14 of 14 in the playoffs. I mean, the man was 28 of 33 on the season overall, but 14 of 14 in the playoffs, 3 for 3 from 50 plus. He had in the fourth quarter against the Raiders, with 6 minutes left, put the Bengals up by 10 in that game. Won the game for Cincinnati at the end of regulation against Tennessee in the second round. Of course, had that great line, guess we're going to the AFC Championship, before he kicked the ball. And Kansas City ends up 4 for 4 in that game as well. Of course, had the game winner, 31-yarder in overtime. Cincinnati ends up in the Super Bowl thanks to the leg of McPherson, in part to the leg of McPherson. 2 for 2 in the Super Bowl. Not as big of an impact there, but definitely a key piece to that Bengals run in the playoffs. But unfortunately for Florida, the maybe the highlight that stood out in the Super Bowl overall was Vernon Hargreaves pulling a Marco Wilson there. He offered Twitter a nice opportunity to trot out their best Marco Wilson jokes by running onto the field as an inactive player. So he's dressed out, street clothes and a towel, and the former first rounder goes on, gets a flag for unsportsmanlike conduct for running onto the field to celebrate an interception at the end of the second, near the end of the second half, is right before the 2-minute warning. Ends up putting the Bengals back on their own 10-yard line to start the drive. Didn't do them any favors with that, but that caused quite a stir on Super Bowl Sunday. So always good. Of course, he went to Florida. You saw a lot of that on Twitter, and always good to trot out more Marco Wilson jokes, Will.
Well, both the Bengals got some pub on Sunday because you had the Hargroves thing running out there in slides. And that's a pretty easy call for the official when there's a guy out there wearing a t-shirt and sandals out in the middle of the end zone. Right. Like, all right, I guess that'll be a flag. Well, then you had McPherson who just stood out there for the whole halftime show. They had pictures of him and video of him rocking out to Dr.
shot
Grant
on that.
Scoop and all that sort of stuff.
I heard an interview with him. Earlier in the week where he called his shot. He said he was going to do that. He said, they don't make plans for the kickers anyway. We just go out and pretty much we go right back. We go into the locker room real quick. We go right back out. He said he did the same thing when the Gators were the Orange Bowl. He stayed out in the field and he watched the halftime show.
Well, that still says, though, that, had he missed a game-winning field goal at the end of the game, can you imagine the takes on, Stephen A. Smith and all that sort of stuff the next day? So, the appearance of impropriety and him not caring actually, I think, does bode well for his future, right? He's going to be a guy who can forget that missed field goal because anybody who's willing to put themselves out there in that capacity, I think maybe is in the right position. Either he needs to be a kicker or needs to be a defensive back, because you need somebody to forget what's going on. And perhaps that's the message here, right? Is that Cincinnati has a kicker and a defensive back from Florida, so they get the interesting publicity from those two. And on the other side, you got a kick returner and really 2 wide receivers, and everything seems to be fine. So yeah, an interesting day for the Gators for sure. And I think close game. That's all you can really ask for. And nobody really caused any real hiccups. I mean, the Hargraves penalty was interesting, but I don't think it decided the game. And that's, I guess that's what I'm happy about, is that those sort of weird things didn't turn into stories. They just were sort of funny stories, not game deciding stories.
Not Marco Wilson throwing a shoe story. Anyway, always bittersweet. Super Bowl is always bittersweet because it's always especially when it's a good game like it was this year. But end of the football season. Love football. Love watching pro football too. Gonna miss football. Not going to be here till August again. So like the dark period of the year has started. You just go on, you put your head down, you go to work, and you just wait for it to start again, right?
Hey man, spring practice only 4 weeks away.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. I was trying to provide. I was setting the scene there. Will, we're getting to a little bit of darkness here, but we'll go into 4 bits here and talk about phase 2 of the Billy Napier journey into the 2022 football season. He calls it the identity phase. And it's fun watching reports of us interpreting all of this for the first time, where there'll be reports like not a lot of specific details on it, but we're figuring it out. We're still figuring it out. But phase 2 of identity, Napier called it in his press conference the other day. He said, identity is the qualities and beliefs that make a group different than other people. I would describe it as design difficulty. We're going to try to present adversity to the players in a lot of different forms. We know that growth comes from struggle. We want to introduce adversity. I'm hopeful that will create and equip the players with some tools and intangibles that down the road, not only when we compete in the fall, but also in life. And he said they mentioned briefly that conditioning would be a big part of this, as you would imagine, heading into spring ball here. And Napier says really what they're trying to do right now is create that momentum toward spring practice, which you mentioned only a few weeks away here. March 15th will be the day that spring practice starts, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you're going to be testing people physically, right? And this is the time of year when the strength and conditioning team is really the only group of coaches who has a whole lot of contact. They're going to have some meetings with assistant coaches and things like that as well. But really the strength and conditioning coaches own this time and then own the time between spring practice and fall camp. So there's obviously a lot of physical tests here, but I think the big thing is the mental toughness, right? I mean, he talked about workouts, talked about eating habits, hydration habits, sleep habits, and really just sort of self-discipline overall. And so, this is when you sort of figure out who's going to be out partying at night. It's not necessarily the physical tests that you're looking for. You're looking for the guy who comes in, rolls in 5 minutes late, smells like he might have had one too many, those sorts of things, and to more extreme points, who's going to end up on the police blotter, who's going to have to sit out the first game of the season because of quote unquote violation of team rules, all sorts of things like that. And then who's going to avoid those things and fully commit to the program and say, look, my identity is a Florida Gator football player. My identity is somebody who's going to go to the NFL. My identity is somebody who's bought in. And that's all they're really looking for, right? And we know they're going to have to push some guys out at the end of spring. And so just from a scholarship perspective, I think they're already up to 89. They're going to have to push some people out. This is an opportunity to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and decide, who are we going to push out? And it's not just going to be people who are the least skilled. It's going to be the people who haven't bought in to not just the physical things that they have to do, but all of the mental and self-discipline things that need to be done as well.
They're giving out weekly awards here. You've seen scholarship athletes of the week, nutrition athletes of the week. I believe that this type, and again, I want to stress to everybody out there, we're not talking about this stuff like, oh, isn't Napier a genius that he's the only one that has a structured and off-season program? But what you don't see at other programs, the difference between this, what Napier is doing that's a little bit different, in my opinion. How many programs out there are this transparent with their kind of week to week updates on what's going on? It just feels like you're getting a better picture. It's not that you're inside the meetings necessarily, but you kind of have a better idea. I think a year from now, for example, or even a couple, let's fast forward a few years into the Billy Napier, you'll kind of have an understanding of what better understanding as a fan of what February looks like inside of our program versus maybe another program down across the country. I think that's been one of the interesting things about Napier so far, is just how transparent they've been about letting you know what they're doing and what the type of work that you're putting that's going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that with Katie Turner, who's and Bree Wade a little bit too, but Turner specifically has engaged with fans pretty extensively, even after the recruiting class was signed. And some people said, you're going to have to do better. She's like, yeah, I agree. And that's not a direct quote, but essentially, we'll make you proud. We're going to make you proud for the 2023 class, was something along the lines of what she tweeted. And so, I think Napier's interesting, and I think this may just be his natural proclivity, but Napier has definitely put time and effort into building a relationship with fans. And it's interesting to see because Dan Mullen seemed to put time and energy into separating himself from fans, whether that was not having camps that were open, whether that was telling fans show up and then we'll start winning, whether it was, just sort of dismissive comments about recruiting and those sorts of things, and those things build up over time. And I think once you start losing, those things become a problem. But just building in that goodwill with the fan base is significant. And Napier, let's be honest, he's going to need some help. And I don't know what the number is at Texas A&M, but there's no doubt that there was money that helped them win the recruiting battle this year.
No, it was the fine institution of Aggieland. And I'll be damned if you keep saying anything else, Will.
I mean, it might have been the fine institution of Aggieland that was writing a bunch of checks to help facilitate those sorts of things. And look, I mean, the Gator Collective is nice, but it ain't delivering the kind of money that they were delivering at Texas A&M, at least not yet. So Napier's going to need those connections. He needs people who are bought in. He's going to need big time boosters and big time donations in order to get the NIL working. And then there are obviously law differences state to state, and that's one of the other things that's being worked on too. But there's never been a more important time to have a strong relationship with your fan base than in the face of needing name, image, and likeness funds to go to your players. Right. Because where does that come from? It can't come from the university. The university can't take that $57 million check they just got from the SEC for the TV deals for the conference and distribute that amongst their players. They're not allowed to do that yet. Now, I think we can argue about whether they should be able to do that. I think that's actually a good argument to have. It really is sort of the only business where you charge your fans to come to a game and then you take donations to help pay the people who are there, who are there supplying the product. But it's the way it is, right? And so the way it is means that relationships with the fans and relationships with the donors are just as, if not more important than relationships with the players. And so, Napier came in talking about one day at a time, one person at a time. And it feels like in some capacity, that's what a lot of this is about, right? Is that, you saw the slow drip of staff, right? Every day there was a new staff person being announced during the offseason. They could have probably announced everybody in a 3 or 4 day period. It's not as though it was like, oh, they're waiting for somebody's season to finish and then they hire somebody, like the Vikings just hired the offensive coordinator for the Rams and had to wait till he was done. Mm-hmm. That didn't have to happen, right? Napier, there were a few things for the NFL that were working like that for on-field coaches, but all those assistants, they could have announced right away. They didn't. They did it day after day to sort of give that slow drumbeat of not only transparency, but give every one of those coaches or assistants or staff members their day in the sun to sort of introduce them to the fan base. I think that's important. And you think about that in terms of marketing overall. One of the guys I work with who talks about marketing talks about sort of dunking your competitor's head under the water every day, right? And that you want sort of the steady drumbeat of products and launches and that sort of stuff. So it's not like one big launch and then nothing happens for a year. It's all right, a launch. And then when everybody gets ready to compete with that launch, okay, now here's the next one. And then when they get ready to compete with that, okay, here's the next one. And it just always feels like you're a step ahead. And I think from a communication standpoint, that's absolutely true. Now, Florida comes out and goes 4-8, nobody's gonna care. Right. So communication gets you a lot of laudits in the off season, but it isn't going to matter if you don't deliver on the field and if you don't matter with recruiting or if you don't deliver on the recruiting trail. But at the end of the day, the identity, I think in some cases of this team or of this program is relationship building. And that doesn't just mean with the players, it means with the fans as well.
And that is an extra critical component when you consider our story here in 6 bits, where we'll talk about the failed coup at Auburn this past couple of weeks, really. And we typically do keep the focus on what's happening in Gainesville, but there's just been enough craziness out in the plains that we have to address this. It did pique our interest. And after a season of dysfunction in Gainesville, Billy Napier, we just talked about it. His steady approach has been really a breath of fresh air here. And it's really stands in stark contrast to what's happening out in Auburn at the moment. This past week here, I had 2 tweets back to back on my timeline. The first being from Zach Abalverdi. It says, Billy Napier says all teams have an offseason program, but adds, we would like to think that ours is an advantage and that we do it better. Sounds arrogant. Sounds like, okay, it's kind of like when football coaches sit there and go, nobody's going to work harder than us. There's a football coach somewhere else in America screaming that same thing. And maybe one team really is working harder than the other, but if both teams are working hard, then they're both working hard. But so that seems like a silly football guy thing to say. But the very next tweet on my timeline was from Brandon Marcello from 24/7 Sports. Auburn president Jay forgive me for this name, Gogue here, Will. I'm not even going to try it here. He said, let me be clear. Our university, the administration, and the entire board of trustees stand behind Coach Harsin and are ready to help him succeed as the leader of our football program. He had to be clear because they spent the better part of a week and a half trying to fire the guy behind the scenes. All right. So it ends up being this huge internal struggle that gets really messy, really out in public. I think Brandon Marcello had a Twitter Spaces that I listened to with Auburn fans where he had tweeted out that Auburn family fights tend to spill out in the yard and people like to come and watch. I thought that was a great way to put it. But you have a guy that comes in from Boise State last year. And I remember being semi-impressed by the hire because it wasn't a smooth process to get there, if you remember. There was a lot of internal fighting. The defensive coordinator, Kevin Steele, they tried to put him in over Gus Malzahn. Gus eventually gets fired. Steele, that whole faction fades away. The athletic director steps in, takes control. Alan Green, the athletic director, takes control, goes out, makes the hire of Harsin. Obviously, not everybody was behind that. They start 6-2 this past season, ended up losing 5 straight to finish 6-7. We just went through a very similar type of season. Pretty frustrating when you're on that slide, right? Things happen. On top of that, things happen within the fan base. People talk a little much. They get going. It gets divisive. We just experienced a season very similar to that. On top of that, the recruiting is really struggling for, SEC standards out there. Will, I believe you did tell me they finished 19th. They end up finishing 19th, or at least they're sitting at 19th right now after the February signing day, correct?
Yeah, so they were 19th last year. They're 19th this year. You look at it, their top recruit who signed the letter of intent is ranked 141st. So they've got 3 guys in the top, like in the top 200, and then they've got another 2 guys in the top 300, and then that's kind of it, right? I mean, you go down, and there's some good players there, right? But at the same time, I think you look at it and say, if Florida had that recruiting class this year, we'd be like, like this is like, as a transition class, this is a struggle. And then you sit there and go, well, this is Harsin's bump class. And it's not as though all of this stuff, I mean, this stuff might have been going on behind closed doors, and so you wonder what were the players saying when recruits were coming onto campus, because we all know. I mean, when I went to grad school, we knew what professors we wanted to work for when we came in, not because we met them and talked to them about the research. That, one of the nights we were there when they were recruiting us for graduate school, you went out with all the grad students, and even the grad student who said, yeah, I enjoy my professor. That's great. Let's drink. I mean, that was the guy. You're like, okay, I'm avoiding that guy's boss. And some of them were openly antagonistic about it, right? You're like, no way am I working for that guy. And other people were glowing. And I think a lot of times these official visits look like that too. So you think about all of the angst with the assistant coaches. I mean, Derek Mason took a pay cut to go take the same job at Oklahoma State, something like that. And then you've got a bunch of coaches who've left. You got a bunch of players who've left, a lot of discontent sort of with the way they've been getting treated. And then you combine that with the fact that it's not as though he's replacing the players who are leaving with elite level prospects. And you're at a place very early on where, you're sort of stuck, because you're sitting there going, okay, he's going to have to win in almost the exact same situation we've been talking about with Dan Mullen. Like, he's going to have to win with players who are good players, but inferior to everybody on the A&M, Georgia, Alabama, LSU. You start looking at where they're finishing, and they're 9th in the SEC, but there aren't a whole lot of West teams. I mean, you got Ole Miss and Mississippi State and Arkansas behind them, just barely, and that's it. And so, you figure that's going to be a struggle. And Auburn doesn't take well to losing to Alabama, but you start losing all the other guys too, and it's going to be an issue. So I still think Harsin's in trouble. I'm not sure he makes it out of this year, unless he turns it around and is able to win a bunch of games. But I don't see a path to that happening unless he happens to strike gold at quarterback, and I don't think that's going to happen either.
Well, I'm going to put some numbers behind some of the comments you just made, but while I'm doing that, can you pull up the 2022 schedule for Auburn?
Absolutely.
Take a quick look at that. So I first off, shout out to Nathan King and Brandon Marcello both, but I grabbed information from both of them. Excellent Auburn voices there. Brandon used to cover it. Nathan does cover it for 24/7 Sports here on providing excellent timeline for the events around this. But hey, keep in mind, Harsin, as much of a struggle as the season was, you beat LSU on the road for the first time in I believe 2 decades. That's been a big struggle with Auburn. Didn't happen under Gus. Didn't happen under Chisholm. It's been about 2 decades since they've won at LSU. They got that done this year with Harsin. Alabama, 59 minutes of the game, they're up. They're through 59. They're up. Bama needed to go down to the wire just to survive on that game. Oh, that is it. Getting an Amber Alert there on the phone. Sorry about that.
Uh-oh.
Had that on silent.
Who's in your basement, Nick?
Yeah. So let's go through here. So right after the Iron Bowl, Mike Bobo gets fired. Maybe a forced marriage early on with that SEC guy, guy coming from the Northwest, hires an SEC guy, didn't have a ton of success there at South Carolina, gets hired immediately for the same spot at Auburn. Over the course of the last month here, you've had guys like Bo Nix enters the transfer portal. Tank Bigsby, the running back. This one shocked me with Bigsby when he said he was going to leave, but then he decides to come back. 18 players, though, hit the transfer portal. 18 scholarship players end up hitting the transfer portal when it's all said and done. On top of that, Will, defensive coordinator Derek Mason, you mentioned it, takes a $400,000 pay cut to go to Oklahoma State in the Big 12. And this is a guy who's a West Coast guy, like, who came out to the SEC to coach at Vandy, used that job, gets fired from Vandy, stays in the SEC, doesn't have Big 12 ties necessarily, but taking a $400,000 pay cut to go to the Big 12. Wow, that says something right there. Austin Davis, hired from the Seattle Seahawks to become the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. About a month later, quits the job. So not a lot of public information. 43 days on the job officially for Austin Davis there. Not a lot of public reasoning there. You say stepping away for personal reasons. Rumors through different shows. I listen to Split Zone Duo. Those guys are great. If you ever want to listen to a good college football podcast, those guys are great. Split Zone Duo, Stephen Godfrey, those guys, they always have great inside information. There was some speculation on there that maybe it was a personality conflict with him and Harsin, but Harsin is just under a lot of pressure. They're not delivering on these recruits right now. It's a lot of turmoil behind the scenes there, trying to figure it out. And maybe a guy who didn't have that support, didn't build that supportive base. That's another thing they speculated on. Credit to Split Zone Duo for this here, but they're saying didn't necessarily engage all that well with the Auburn community. So all this is not to point at Auburn and go, haha, like that's not the point of this segment. The point of this segment is, after sitting through a rather dysfunctional 2021 season here in Gainesville and seeing what's going on at Auburn, which most programs are looking at Auburn and going, what is going on right there? It's not the norm by any means. I think we got to stop and appreciate the fact that we have a guy in town who seems to want to make a great effort to connect with the fans, who seems super organized and completely like a great fit for this job. Auburn, keep in mind, one of those jobs that Napier turned down. Why was Napier so picky about jobs? He wanted that alignment within the organization. We're getting the new facilities. Strickland's on board with whatever he needs. You got a lot of support with the Gator Collective and a lot of willing people to get Florida back to where it needs to be. And I think that the changes we've made heading into 22, we might be 7-5 in 2022, but the future is bright here in Gainesville. And so when Will and I talk about these little things, the identity, the different phases, like, yeah, I get it. Everybody else has their offseason program, but things are getting on the same page. We got a guy who's organizing things real well, and I think we're headed in a great direction. And it's just great not to have to deal with stuff like what's going on with Auburn right now. It's absolute craziness. And you're right. I think Harsin, they ended up deciding to keep him. There were some players that came out, said maybe he went over the line with some of the things he said. Players came out to defend him as well. I don't know what's going on, but that bump class, I think, that theory that you and Sykes have with the bump class needing to be excellent, that's already gone. So I don't know what's going to happen with Harsin. I don't have a lot of faith that he's going to succeed at Auburn, but I don't know if he's necessarily getting the type of support you need to succeed at a place like Auburn either. Whereas I don't feel like that's happening in Gainesville right now. I feel like the program's getting a ton of support right now, and I feel like you got the right guy in the driver's seat.
Well, so I mean, I think there's a lot there to unpack. I think the first thing is that your job as a head coach at a college football program is to deliver hope. That more than anything is why Dan Mullen was fired. If they'd have lost the way they did to South Carolina, and then Anthony Richardson had started the next week, and all of a sudden they'd ripped off 3 straight wins, and the team looked like they were alive, Mullen maybe keeps his job. I think if he'd maybe started Anthony Richardson earlier in the year, even if Richardson had struggled, I think Mullen keeps his job, because there's hope the program has the ability to take that next step if you find out what you have in that particular player. And I think one of the frustrations with Mullen is that you didn't find out whether the guys he'd brought in could give you hope for the future. Because once you're 4-3, like, who cares, right? I mean, obviously you want to play well, you want to win those games, you want to be competitive, but you still got to figure out what you've got in the future. It's sort of the idea that if titles are the goal, and you go all the way back to, even the process in Philadelphia with Sam Hinkie. I mean, right now the Sixers fans are reaping the benefits of that, because Joel Embiid is here in Philadelphia and Ben Simmons just got traded for James Harden. So at the end of the day, like, all the losing in some respects was worth it. And I think college football fans in many cases are willing to go through some growing pains if there's hope at the end of the rainbow. And so the problem with Harsin is that you look at his recruiting and there's not hope at the end of the rainbow. You get the transfers he's bringing in. He literally just exchanged Bo Nix for Bo Nix, because Bo Nix leaves the program and he brings in Zach Calzada, who transfers from Texas A&M, who had a QB rating of 124. Like, he lit up Alabama, but other than that, like, was below average the entire year long at Texas A&M. And so he just brought in a guy, like, if I'm an Auburn fan, I'd be really frustrated with the development of Bo Nix. Now, I don't think it's a surprise looking at his high school stats. I think that's what we should have expected from Bo Nix. Bo Nix is a high level recruit, right? And he transfers out. Now you bring in a guy who's essentially going to give you the same performance. So where's the hope? And then you combine that with the fact
Bama will.
All right, whatever. So you combine that with the fact that
trying to get my Auburn on.
Yeah, okay. You combine that with the fact that clearly the athletic director does not have full autonomy at Auburn. And I think that's really what we're talking about here, right? Because Scott Strickland would have just ignored all the noise and would have said, I'm going to keep Mullen, if he thought keeping Mullen was the right thing to do. And I think statistically, and I think recruiting wise, and I think relationship wise, it became clear that keeping Mullen was not the right thing to do. And that's why the move was made. And, I had reached out to some people that I knew within the program when all that stuff was going on. The only response I would get is, Scott will get this right. Right. And so the people who are backing the athletics in the program clearly have a commitment to Scott Strickland and what he's doing. You can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they have his back, which means he's able to make decisions that are good for the long-term health of the program. And that's what that's what Napier's buying into, right? Napier's buying into the fact that this is a 4, 5, 6, 7 year commitment, not a, you better deliver right now. The fact that Harsin's only been there for a year and is already feeling heat, not just for his job, but feeling heat to perform is backwards. Like, you should have to feel heat on the recruiting side, right? But in terms of on the field, like, if Napier starts out 6-2 and ends up 6-7, yeah, I'll be disappointed. But if he's got a top 3 class coming in, I'm not going to care, because Napier's job that year is not necessary. It's to develop the players. It's to sort of find out what you have. It's to do the best you can to instill that in the players. And 6-7 is disappointing. At the same time, 6-7 with hope for the future is something I can buy into. 6-7 with a 19th ranked recruiting class. Ooh, that's a disaster, which is why I feel the same way about Florida State, right? Florida State is in the exact same situation. The difference is Florida State does not have to play Auburn's schedule. You asked me to look that up, and ooh boy.
Yeah, let's go over that. Let's see what Auburn's got ahead of it here in 2022.
So they start out with Mercer at Jordan-Hare. Then they play San Jose State. Okay, so we open up with a couple of cupcakes. Then Penn State comes to Jordan-Hare. Then one of their East teams, Missouri, at Jordan-Hare, and then LSU at Jordan-Hare. So everything's at home, first 5 games. LSU with Brian Kelly. We'll see whether they're that much better. Penn State, that's a pretty good game, right? So, I mean, you can see a scenario where they're 3-2, but maybe a scenario where they're 5-0. But remember, all 5 of those are at Jordan-Hare. Here's what comes up after that. At Georgia, at Ole Miss, bye week, Arkansas, at Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Western Kentucky, and at Alabama.
Boy.
So Georgia, A&M, and Alabama, you just write those in as losses. The at Mississippi State, the at Ole Miss, and the LSU, I think, are toss-ups at best. The Penn State is going to depend a lot, but that's certainly, I mean, this is a schedule where you can see 6-6 pretty easy. Without a whole lot of effort.
That Penn State game looms large there at the beginning. If you take care of Penn State at the beginning, you think Carson might have a shot. I think if you get to a point where really you're looking at close to 6-6, give or take a game, right? With that schedule. I think that's really all you can expect from Harsin this year, but I don't know if that's going to be enough to stick around.
Well, and think about what will happen with the Noise if they lose to Penn State. Let's say they lose a close one to Penn State. They beat LSU, so they're 4-1, and then they go to Sanford Stadium against Georgia and lose by 40.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, because that's kind of what you're looking at. Now you're 4-2. You go to at Ole Miss before a bye week. You've just gotten spanked by Georgia. Like, what does that look like? I think you probably lose that game. Now you're 4-3 going into a bye week, and you still have A&M and Alabama on the schedule. That's rough. So, it's one of those things where that Penn State game obviously is going to loom large. But I think the Georgia game and whether they can keep it close or whether that turns into a massacre, I think will be a big part of it as well. You always forget that Georgia and Auburn have sort of that crossover, mainly because the LSU crossover is usually harder for Florida than the Auburn crossover is for Georgia. But that's brutal, man, to get Alabama, A&M, and Georgia all on the schedule. Those are all three teams that are more talented. And you think about it, like you think about the talent, Arkansas is close in terms of recruiting over the last 4 years to Auburn. Mississippi State is close. Ole Miss is close. LSU's better. Georgia's better. A&M's better. Alabama's better. Missouri is worse, though Missouri's a lot better this year in terms of the class they're bringing. And then Penn State is better. So they're going to be out-talented by 4 or 5 teams on their roster. And that's not something you would have said about Auburn 5, 6, 7 years ago. You would have said LSU's equivalent. You would have said Georgia and Alabama are better and A&M is below them. And that's the thing. The winds have shifted in the SEC West, and sliced bread has something to say about that at A&M, but you still got to deal with it.
The reality is, though, this is Auburn. You try to fire Gus every single year. You brought in Petrino on the plane while Tuberville was still there. Auburn's chaos at all times behind the scenes. So,
which says something about Napier's decision-making process, right? Like Harsin had an opportunity to leave Boise State and make the big bucks in the SEC, and he decided to do it. Napier had an opportunity to leave Louisiana and make the big bucks in the SEC at Auburn, and he decided to stick it out at Louisiana. Now, certainly he gave lip service and says, and I think maybe I believe him, that the reason he didn't make that jump is because he wanted to finish what he'd started at Louisiana and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think that's true. I think if the right job had opened, I think if Mullen had just decided to call it quits after last year, he said COVID was too much and I can't take it. I've lost my love for the sport and I'm going to take a year off. I think Napier would have taken the Florida job last year.
Yeah.
And I think Strickland would have had him on the radar. And I think the reality is that the Auburn job checked a lot of the boxes for Napier, but not all of them. And one of those boxes that it didn't check was he'd been recruiting against those guys with Saban for a couple of years there. I guarantee you that they made fun of the dysfunction when they were there in Tuscaloosa. So he knew those sorts of things. He's going to be friends with all the higher ups in the Alabama area. If you spend any time on that Alabama staff, he knows what's going on over there, probably more intimately than most, and just said, look, there will be a better opportunity that comes along. And sure enough, a better opportunity came along. And that opportunity comes not only with the money for Florida, but the alignment. And, I'm sure there are a few other programs that have that kind of alignment, but there aren't that many programs that have proven to be successful in all the different athletics. And so you think about Florida's success in women's basketball now, though that's a little bit weird with some of the stuff, but in gymnastics and in swimming and, men's basketball needs to make some changes, but they've been successful in the past, and baseball and all those sorts of things. So Florida from an athletic program has prioritized its athletes, has prioritized its athletics. And I think when you look at the commitment that they're now putting into football, they're prioritizing football. And once Napier got that commitment, he said, okay, when they decide to prioritize a sport, those sports are successful at Florida. And so they've decided to prioritize football in a way that they haven't prior to Napier's arrival. And so we can expect that there's going to be some results from that specifically. And at the end of the day, at least Napier won't be able to make excuses. It's going to be his vision. He selected it. He's gotten everything that he wanted. He got concessions from Florida in terms of staff and dollars and facilities and use of private plane and all that sort of stuff. And so at the end of the day, I think, sink or swim, this Billy Napier ship, and we'll see whether the decision that he made was a good one. But I think we can say, based on the Harsin experience, that the decision he made was a good one, at least from a sanity perspective. So it's good because it reflects on his decision-making process.
Yeah. If Napier fails at Florida, it won't be because of disorganization and chaos like what's going on at Auburn. So it'll be through something else. But I thought that situation at Auburn was something to really stop and really take a moment and appreciate what we have going on in Gainesville heading into 2022. Everyone, I know it was a difficult 2021, but take a moment and appreciate it. All right, let's move on to a dollar here. We'll talk about your article this week, Will, the hope and promise of Anthony Richardson. Immediate critique of the article: you did not advise him to stop doing backflips before the games. I'm very big on that campaign. We need to get that going, get that word out there to Anthony to just chill on the backflips, because I'm scared. I don't want anything to happen to Anthony. He's got to stay good, because the main point of your article, Will, is it's not just that blind optimism we have for it. You put the numbers behind it, and it was a fascinating read. And of course, it's on our YouTube channel. If you don't have time to go through and read the whole article, Will reads it out on the YouTube channel. Just a reminder there for everybody. But Will, your favorite guy to talk about when you talk about that taking that jump is Joe Burrow. Do you see any type of comparison there for Anthony Richardson to jump in and really didn't get a full season as a starter like Burrow did in 2018 before exploding in 2019? But you talk about a Burrow. Is there a path to a Burrow-like leap? What did you find from your study?
I mean, look, I think anytime we talk about a Burrow-like leap, we need to be realistic that that's a once in a generation type thing that you're going to see. And that, look, the guy just led the Bengals, man, to the Super Bowl and got sacked like 70 times this year. So he's a special player. And certainly my ego enjoys seeing him succeed because I saw it before maybe some other people did. But I think you compare him because you use it to tell the narrative of how he improved. And so how he improved from 2018 to 2019 was he did it strictly through he threw downfield a little bit more often. His yards per completion really ticked up. His yards per attempt did not. But what wound up happening his yards per completion stayed the same, but his yards per attempt went way up. And the reason is because he went from completing like 57% of his passes to completing 72% of his passes. And you look at that and go, whoo, that's a huge jump. Now, I don't think Richardson's going to be able to do that, but he completed about just below 60% of his passes this past year. And he completed 65% of his passes his senior year of high school. Now, obviously, these are both very limited attempts. He only attempted 124 passes because his senior season was shortened over 6 games when he completed 65% of his passes. But, if he can complete 65% of his throws, raising that from 59.4, and he can average the same 8.3 yards per attempt, then we're going to be looking at him with like a QB rating in like the 180s. And that's really, really, really good. And then you combine that with his rushing numbers. And this is the thing I thought was really interesting. If you take away his 73-yard run versus Florida Atlantic, and you take away his 80-yard run versus USF, Richardson averaged 5.5 yards per rush. And that was so Emory Jones averaged 5.6 yards per rush over the course of the year. So basically what you're getting is the running game that Emory Jones brought to the table, with the possibility of a 75 or an 80-yard run at any time. And so the explosive plays that Richardson brings with him are significant. Now, he went downfield a ton. Like if you look, I've got some heat maps in there for these guys, 20 plus yards downfield. From a success rate perspective, Emory Jones was really bad on throws that were 20 plus yards down the field, only 26% success rate. So success rate is basically,
we watched the Gasparilla Bowl. Yeah.
But success rate is a measure of, how often were you successful so like 3rd and 12, if you get a 9-yard gain, that's considered not successful. But 1st and 10, you get a 9-yard gain, that's considered successful. So Richardson was successful 36% of the time. You compare that to Trask, he was in the year before, he was successful 52% of the time. So Richardson is on, and you look at the shorter throws, and Richardson was as successful as often as Kyle Trask. So I think as he gets more time, as he gets more experience, the numbers when he goes deep are going to improve. The other thing is he went deep twice as often as Emory Jones did on a percentage basis. So he threw downfield 23% of his throws were 20 plus yards downfield. And so if you think about it, he had a 59% completion percentage, and he was going downfield 23% of the time on his throws, versus Kyle Trask, who went downfield 15% of the time on his throws in 2020, and was throwing nearer the line of scrimmage much more often than Anthony Richardson. So there is a path to increase that completion percentage significantly by becoming far more proficient in the 11 to 20 yard downfield range, which is an area where he certainly struggled last year. But I think that suggests that it's not that he doesn't have the arm strength to get it there. And looking at the film, it's not that he's not making the right reads. I think there's some mechanical issues in terms of getting the ball out, particularly to the right-hand side of the field. But I also think that one of the things is just that he was put in some really difficult situations. And we saw in the game against LSU that he can make plays with his feet, but then he can also make the throws. I mean, geez, that throw to Copeland that tied the game at 42 was just unbelievable down the right-hand side of the field. Mm-hmm. So he has that ability. The question is going to be, can you harness that ability? And I think that when you look at it, the fact that he was going downfield so much suggests that that completion percentage can come up significantly. And if it comes up significantly, you're going to have a QB with a QB rating somewhere in the 160, 170, 180 range, who also can hit huge runs, at any given time, right? He can turn a 5-yard run into an 80-yard run, like he did against USF, where he just bounced off a couple of guys and turned it into 80 yards. The only question is, can he stay healthy? Like, I don't like
Stop
when I was
doing backflips.
Well, but when I was watching the LSU game, there wasn't one throw he threw into double coverage. Even the interception that ended the game, he threw to the right guy. He just threw it off of his back foot because he was getting pressured and didn't get enough on it. And to be honest, I think Rick Wells could have helped him out a little bit by coming back to the ball and at least knocking it down, as opposed to continuing to run downfield. And granted that, you're judging the throw, and that's a tough thing to do. But if he'd have just stopped, he would have gotten a pass interference because the defensive back would have run into him. But he threw to the right guy. It was one-on-one coverage. It was a wheel route, sort of from the high side of the field down to the low side of the field, run a little bit of a rub and a wheel. He threw it to the guy who was in one-on-one coverage. It just underthrew it and turned into an interception. Mm-hmm. You can live with those. What really you don't want to live with is a guy who lofts it up into double coverage, a guy who's constantly trying to fit it into tight spots, a guy who won't pull the trigger when it's open, all those sorts of things. And a guy who's late, right? Late across the middle, late to the outside, those sorts of things. I saw two truly bad passes when I watched him against Georgia and LSU. The first was they had a weird throwback from Emory Jones, took the snap, threw it to Anthony Richardson, and Richardson threw it downfield into double coverage against Georgia. But that was like a 2nd and 24. So I'm not quite sure why Mullen was calling a double pass at that point. I mean, Georgia was already going to sit in the zone. Like 2nd and 24, you're going to be in a zone. I'm not sure what you're trying to do there, because that's a play you try to take advantage of man-on-man with. And then the other one is the pick six that he threw into Kobe Dean. I mean, that was a bad throw to the outside, late to the outside, allow the linebacker to break. He takes it to the house. But the other plays, I was actually pretty impressed with the way he handled the Georgia defense. There's one play he got tricked with a couple of different zone blitzes. There were some things where he threw the ball away when he got tricked. There was one where he threw it over the middle where he got tricked, and there was somebody dropping into coverage, turned into a tip pass that turned into an interception. Again, those are things that, because you've given him limited reps, and now he's playing against a Kirby Smart defense, and he's been trying to essentially get up to speed on the offense rather than really focusing on what the defense is going to do from a schematic perspective. You would expect somebody to get clipped by those sorts of things every once in a while. So anyway, I walk away from it more encouraged than I was before going in. And I was already pretty high on Anthony Richardson, but and I don't want him to stop with the backflips, because I think in some cases the backflips are a representation of what he brings. And it's that hope, it's the enthusiasm, it's the athleticism. And he didn't get hurt on the backflips. I will say, stop dancing the night before. Like I'll live.
If you get hurt from dancing, the backflip, come on, man, do the math on that. Do the math.
And he didn't get hurt with the backflips. He didn't get hurt with the backflips.
Play the video. We got it on video. We've seen the backflips. We know you could do it, dude. Win the Heisman. Do a backflip after you win a national title. Do that.
That'd be awesome if he backflips off the stage after he wins the Heisman.
Do it off the stage. Go. No, not the Heisman. National title. National title. You still got games after the Heisman, Will. But yeah, national title. Go ahead. Backflip away. But I do think that's a big challenge this year, where Richardson, as much as we love to talk about the potential, how do you feel like he can hold up? Do you feel like he can hold up throughout a whole season based on what we saw from him this past year? Because he does run with a really physical style. And if you're prone to injury with that type of physical running style, I mean, how much of that can you coach out of a guy?
Well, so here's a couple of things. How did he really get injured? Right, he got injured in the FSU game when he got hit on a running play, but that was sort of a re-aggravation of the injury that he hurt dancing.
A little fluky too, yeah.
He got hurt against LSU when the offensive line got completely blown over and he got drilled on a ball he threw away. So that one, I mean, that's not him running the ball. That's the offensive line getting beat and him getting hit and it being a hand injury when they were trying to bring him down. And then he got hurt running on a hamstring, which he's had some hamstring issues in the past, but that's sort of a freak injury. You don't really expect that to happen. And quite honestly, if his hamstring is going to go, there's nothing you can do to avoid that. That's a soft tissue injury.
Sure.
It's the same thing. It's not the same thing, but it's similar to, if a guy plants and non-contact goes down with an ACL, you don't sit there and go, oh, we shouldn't have run him. It's like, no, sometimes those things just happen. Right. So here's what I would say is that when I look at the tape, I see a quarterback who, and in fact, I have an example in the article where on a little 5-yard touchdown pass to Justin Shorter, he knows he's got one-on-one coverage and he holds a linebacker with his eyes. It opens up the throw and the throw is on time, on target for a touchdown.
And how many of those types of throws did we see with Emory Jones at the helm last year inside the red zone like that?
Well, and that was the point that I made is that the ball was always late in the red zone with Emory Jones and that things were always hard once they got inside the 20. If Florida had been more efficient in the red zone last year, Florida goes 8-4, 9-3 because, the red zone efficiency was just awful all year long. Even in the Alabama game, they got the opening drive, they took it all the way down, couldn't punch it in. You get down to the end, they punch the ball in, but then can't get the 2-point conversion. Everything was always so difficult.
Kentucky game, the red zone. End of the Kentucky game.
Yeah, all that stuff. And so to see the ease with which he operated in the red zone, and even I think there was a 2-point conversion at one point in that LSU game where LSU had him dead to rights. The play was completely busted and he just ran around and got it in the end zone for the 2 points. So that part exists too. But this play specifically, he holds a linebacker with his eyes and it's easy. And that's the thing that I think that Napier's going to have to lean into is convincing him that you can make it easy with the threat of your legs, that you don't have to every time maximize what we get out of this particular play. And so he's going to have to be smart, right? They're going to have to teach him to do that. And then the other thing is that when there's a free blitzer coming, he's going to have to get rid of the ball in the empty space. That is one thing you saw against Georgia that he was sort of processing during the game is throwing on the backside when the guy was blitzing off the edge or throwing over the middle when two guys are blitzing in the middle. Those things are going to come as he gets more time and he's going to get hit less. But part of it's just going to be going down, right? I mean, the fumble against Georgia was something where if he'd had just gone down, that fumble doesn't happen. Yeah, he doesn't gain an extra 4 or 5 yards, but you don't fumble the ball and Georgia doesn't have that big run at the half. And so, those sorts of things where you're trying to get the extra 2 yards. Yeah. Sometimes you lose the battle to win the war. And I think he's going to have to do that, but let's be honest, right? He was being put in a situation where if he didn't win the battle, he was on the bench. And so I understand why he would go out there and be aggressive and run over the linebacker and give max effort on every play, because he wasn't going to get back out there unless he showed max effort on every play. Because, I mean, after the first 2 games, we knew he was the best quarterback. And still Mullen's like, no, he's missing reads and he's not getting his protection set correctly and all this sort of stuff. We're like, look, all I know is when he comes in the game, the offense scores. And when he doesn't come in the game, the offense doesn't score. And irrespective of whether he's reading things correctly or whether he's missing blitzers or those sorts of things, Florida scores. The offense looks different. There's different energy. The players look like they're going harder. Things open up for the running backs, all that sort of stuff. And so I don't necessarily blame him for going hard last year because he was trying to win a job. If he already has the job, then you got to convince him, hey, slide. Hey, get out of bounds. Hey, you don't have to take off and run on 1st and 10 and sort of squeeze between 2 guys for a gain of 2. Just chuck it out of bounds. And I think if you do that over the course of the year, that you're going to see somebody who gets injured less, because he's a big guy. This isn't something where it's like a tiny guy with a slight build who, you sit there and go, oh, that guy might be injury prone from the start. This is a guy who's got who's a big dude, who's got a lot of skill and ability. And you just sort of have to harness that. I think they'll be able to do that. And, maybe I'll be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong about his ability to be a good to great passer. And a good to great passer with his running ability means you've got an elite player at quarterback.
Well, based on previous interviews I've seen with Napier, I don't think, even if there's clarity within that locker room on who's going to be the number one guy, I think with Emory Jones, we'll have the answer by the end of spring what his role is going to be within the program. Because I do think you'll end up, I believe he'll end up transferring, just basically get an opportunity to play somewhere, last year or two here of his career. But I think that even if you see that, obviously you probably feel pretty good that Richardson's going to start. But I do believe Napier is going to play close to the vest and not try to give Utah any information, especially if Emory ends up sticking around within the program here. But looking back at Levi Lewis, his only quarterback that he had as a starter at Louisiana, Napier did not run him much. And granted, I have not watched a ton of Louisiana football, so I don't know if he was more of a natural passer anyway, where he just didn't stress that part of the run game. But when I watched Lewis play, I saw him play in person once. I did see Louisiana, happened to see him a couple years ago when they played Mississippi State in the Superdome this season. And the guy can run. He had the ability to run pretty well, actually. Only carried it 100 times last season, which is good for about 7 carries a game. So doesn't seem to be a major emphasis. That was a career high. His other highest total was 69 carries in this season. So does not seem to be a major emphasis in play calling for Billy Napier, at least. So that might not be something to worry about a whole lot anyway.
Maybe. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of run pass options. And when you've got a guy, so, Lewis isn't a stiff back there. He can move a little bit, but certainly not like Anthony Richardson. And when you start talking about run pass options and you start talking about, read options and those sorts of things that you'll install because it fits the personnel. And, I think the reality is that, yes, Napier's going to bring his own offense, but he's going to try to put his guys in a position to succeed. And you look at a guy like Anthony Richardson and say it'd be stupid to not take advantage of the automatic first down that you've got in big time situations in close games when you need it. But when you're playing Western Kentucky or you're playing some cupcake, all right, now it's time to go back and actually read the defense and throw it away and those sorts of things. I sort of think back to, I don't know that. So I think the best case scenario in Florida's situation is that Richardson comes out and is good enough to establish himself as a starter, but not necessarily elite next year. And then we look for a jump in 2023 because you get all those reps. Like I almost think about Chris Leak, right? Now Leak had played for 2 years, obviously in 03 and 04 under Ron Zook, but then Urban Meyer comes in 05 and it's an offense that doesn't quite fit Leak exactly what he wanted to do. Like the Zook offense was much more aligned with what Chris Leak wanted to do. But in 2005, they come in, they've got Leak. They're running a little bit of a weird read option stuff with Leak. And, you don't really know, like, it's just like, this doesn't really fit him all that well. They bring in Tebow. Tebow's breathing down his neck there in 2006 a little bit. But I'll tell you what, we've done some stuff in the past where we've looked at some old Gator games and the South Carolina game that they win 17-16 in that 2006 year. There are a ton of plays where Chris Leak makes plays with his legs in that game, a couple of them read option plays where the fact that Urban Meyer and Dan Mullen went against tendency and used Leak in those capacities really sort of flummoxed South Carolina and allowed Florida to move the ball. And I think that's kind of what you're hoping for here, right? Florida needs, in order to win and win big in the next year or two, Florida is going to need a transcendent quarterback. We've been saying that with Dan Mullen for the recruiting, and Anthony Richardson is the shot. Now, whether he can get there or not, whether he can stay healthy or not, I think is an open debate and a good debate. But the reality is that you're not getting there with Jack Miller. I don't think you're getting there with Max Brown. I don't think you're getting there with Jalen Kitna. I don't think that you're getting there with Carlos Del Rio Wilson. I don't think you're getting there with Emory Jones. Like the only place you're getting there is Anthony Richardson. Now, I agree with you. I think that Napier will play it close to the vest. I think Napier, because of the injury risk, is going to need guys who are ready. I think you always need a backup quarterback. I mean, inevitably you're going to have an injury or two throughout the year. You hope it's not the quarterback, but hey, if he misses a game against Vanderbilt or Missouri or South Carolina or something like that, you need a capable backup to come in and win you the game. But if Florida's going to do anything in 2022 and 2023, it's going to be because they get elite quarterback play. Now, 2024, 2025, 2026, Anthony Richardson's obviously gone at that point. Hopefully we got Arch Manning starting for us at quarterback. But the
Will's fired up about that top 6.
Yeah. But, the reality is that those we hope that those teams are just incredibly talent rich, but they're going to have to overcome a talent deficit the next couple of years. And Richardson is the shot to do that. And the question I was trying to ask is, clearly he showed some big play ability, but is that big play ability masking a lack of understanding on offense? Is it masking an efficiency that isn't there when he's not making the big plays? I think the answer is no. I think he throws to the right guy a vast majority of the time. LSU was scared to death of his running ability, and it made it really easy to read that defense, but he threw it to the right guy every time. And so the fact that they were putting up points and that he was moving the ball down the field and all that sort of stuff is impressive in its own right. But it's also impressive because it wasn't like he was chucking into double coverage and getting lucky and getting bailed out. Right. It was the ball went to a guy who was open almost all the time. Even, the little wheel routes that were going to the running backs and all those sorts of things, they were on time. They were delivered where they needed to be. There was a throw to Gamble where Gamble actually missed it, and it looked like it might get picked, but he had just enough oomph to get it in there. It hits right off of Gamble's hands, and then the defensive back comes over and just barely misses it. You go, that's fitting the ball in a tight window, but in one-on-one coverage, that's an impressive throw. So I think you go back and look at it and say, he's got all the skills to be good. It's not just like this wish and a prayer that, hey, he threw up a couple of deep passes and completed them. And, you look at the rest of his stats and go, oh, that's pretty rough. Like I said, he went deep a lot. 23% of his throws were deep. He still completed 59% of his throws. As that sort of evens out and he starts facilitating the entire offense, he's not going to go deep as often. And so that completion percentage is going to go up. And when the completion percentage goes up, his yards per attempt is going to go up. And when his yards per attempt go up, the offense is going to move even more efficiently than it did before. And you're still going to have that big play capability. So I'm really excited. Like I said, I came into this thinking, all right, is it fool's gold, right? Did the big plays obscure a lack of polish that's going to be a problem that may never, that we may never be able to see the full fruition, that it's going to be flashes of big plays and then a bunch of frustration. Otherwise, I don't think that's the case. I think that we're going to see a much more polished player when he's getting a bunch of snaps next year. And again, the caveat is, can he stay healthy? But if he can, I think, I've seen people predict Florida going 7-5. I don't think there's any way they go 7-5 if Anthony Richardson starts the whole year next year. I really don't. I think 8-4 is the absolute floor. I think they're probably 9-3 or 10-2.
Well, the two key words are in the headline on the article: hope and promise. Be sure to check out that article on readandreaction.com from Will Miles on the hope and promise of Anthony Richardson. It's a great read. Hey, it's February. I know you need some football stuff to read. Check it out. Go check it out. Will, another episode in the books here of Stand Up and Holler. Any final thoughts before we head out?
Thanks everybody for supporting us. We appreciate it. If you go over to Patreon after this, so patreon.com/readandreaction, we're going to have a bonus up in the next couple of days talking about the 2023 recruiting class and some of the sort of the finishing touches on the 2022 class as well. So if you're interested, can't get enough about recruiting, head over there. $2 a month. You can get extra episodes of Stand Up and Holler. And I am going to be writing some articles over there for the $5 tier coming up here in the off season that sort of detail some of the different things that I'm finding as I look into the stats. They'll probably be a little bit shorter than the stuff that's on the site, but some interesting insights you won't be able to get at Read and Reaction alone.
Thank you everybody for joining for another episode of Stand Up and Holler. We appreciate the support. Please be sure to pass our stuff along. We're trying to grow the YouTube channel as well in the off season, making an effort to do that. So pass it along to your Gator friends, and please keep checking us out. We'll be back every single week. We'll see you next week. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.